Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for those that had the power and the energy to join us after the coffee break. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the third and final panel of the Community of Practice. My name is Juan Hernandez. I'm from IPA, Innovation for Poverty Action, and we will be looking for the Yeti of the Himalayas here as well. But we will be looking for the cousin of the Yeti, however this creature looks like. And I'm happy to say that this creature is less elusive and more visible thanks to the efforts that our panelists are doing and that they will be presenting with us. This panel serves as an interesting complement to the conversations we had in previous panels. We have been discussing how implementers scale education policy, how we change practice at the classroom level through messy partnerships with the government. Now we're going to discuss a different messy partnership with the government. This one is fundamental for the scaling efforts to be effective. This is about how we stimulate the use and the demand for evidence among governments and policymakers, and how, if you agree that by having evidence-driven decision-making, we can identify and implement at scale well policies, then the question is how we can help the government to generate and use that evidence at the different levels of the government structure, and how we can do it in a way that is routine and sustainable. So to address those questions, we will have 4 case studies that use different approaches. We will have one that is using networks, another one that is using evidence broker, or 2 ones that are using institutional adjustments to the government settings, such as education labs. We first want to start with a case study that describes the SALEX network. This is going to be led by Rebekka. That is, it will help us to understand how networks deploy different strategies depending on the context to integrate evidence into decision-making and to foster the uptake of that evidence. We will have a second case study led by Ursula and the Global School Forum, who will be focusing on implemented at scale labs that are fostering locally led solutions and how they help them to engage with the government to make those solutions sustainable. And finally, we will explore the idea of education labs that are arrangements that work within and with the government to establish a process for connecting data and evidence and decision-making. And we will explore those in 2 different case studies that have different approaches, one with the Ministry of Education of Rwanda, and the other one with the Tanzania Institute of Education. So if these topics intrigue you, you are in the right place. We have 4 distinguished panelists and a commentator who will be sharing with us their experience and their learnings. And we are very lucky because they are at the forefront of these efforts. So it's my pleasure to introduce them. I will start with Rebekka Flam. She's a senior program associate on the education team at Resolve for Development. In this role, she supports the School Action Learning Exchange, SALEX network, an international education network, and conducts qualitative research for projects focused on education technology. Before joining R4D, Rebekka worked as a teacher and a facilitator for a nonprofit organization in Thailand that promotes access to education for migrant youth and support leadership development. Then we have Ursula Hankinson. She's a senior monitoring, evaluation, and learning manager at Global School Forum, where she leads efforts within the Global School Forum community to design, implement, and learn from implementation to support delivering learning outcomes. Previously, Ursula worked at CANFED International, Girl Effect, and Barkey Foundation on large-scale mixed methods evaluations. And then we have Adia Umusila. She's a research and policy advisor at Innovation for Poverty Action, Rwanda. She's embedded at the Ministry of Education of Rwanda. She supports research and policy in the policy analysis department, as well as planning in the monitoring and evaluation department within the ministry. As a researcher, Adia has particular interest in using quantitative research to produce usable evidence for education and social protection policymaking. And we have Doreen Samwel, who is a curriculum developer at the Tanzania Institute of Education, specializing in developing and designing the curriculum and trying out instructional materials such as textbooks and education modules of various educational levels. She also conducts in-service training for college tutors and teachers and participates in the research, monitoring, and evaluation of curriculum and any other education activities. And then finally, we have Donika Dimovska. She's the Chief Knowledge Officer at the Jacob Foundation, where she has been leading organization knowledge initiatives since 2020. Her role focuses on advancing the foundation mission as a leading learning organization, overseeing strategic learning, knowledge building, impact monitoring, and external communication. Thank you very much to our panelists for being with us today. So, as with the previous sessions, we will follow the standard operation procedures. We will have 12 minutes for each presentation. I would kindly but firmly ask to stick to that time to each of the presenters. Please don't make me step in and interrupt your presentation. The organizers have been very clear about this. And then we will have Donika, who will be sharing her remarks on the presentations. And after that, we will open it for questions and answers. So thank again. And with that, let's begin with Rebekka, who will be presenting on the SALEX network case study. Thank you so much.
Hey, hello everyone. Oh, that came quickly, great. So my name is Rebekka Flam. I am a Senior Program Associate at Results for Development, and we are the backbone facilitating team for the School Action Learning Exchange. So today I'm very excited to be here on behalf of SALEX and share about a recent report that we published called Unpacking How Education Learning Networks Can Best Support Evidence Use in Global Education. Okay, so just to get started, I'll just give a little bit of an introduction to SALEX, who we are, what we do. We have a lot of SALEX members in the room today as well, and how we define education learning networks. And then I'll get into a few of our key takeaways from the report. So what is an education learning network? Just to ground the conversation, at R4D, this is how we define collaborative learning. Bringing together change agents that have common goals and are convened in a way that allow them to systematically learn from each other and co-create solutions to challenges of common interest. And as most of you probably know, collaborative learning networks exist in many different domains and spaces, a lot, especially in the health sector, which is where R4D facilitates, but also in the education sector. And we consider SALEX an education learning network, which we define as a network that connects education system actors to produce and exchange knowledge using adult learning theory and social learning principles. So our shared vision of SALEX, which we developed with the members themselves, is to support a community of school networks, organizations, and their members by creating a mechanism for collaborative learning. And we want to have joint learning and collaboration both at the network and school level, and ultimately resulting in a strengthened global school ecosystem. And here's just a photo of us in Colombia. And I didn't mention we are funded by the Jacobs Foundation. I should mention that. But yes, we had our annual convening in March in Colombia, and you'll see actually many faces in the room that are in this picture as well. SALEX, we began our implementation 2 years ago at the end of 2022. And yeah, It's been a great 2 years so far. This is our list, our current list of members. So yeah, many, as I said, in the room, Schools 2030, IB, members from all different geographies. So many of our members are global networks themselves. So we like to call ourselves a network of networks, but some are more regional or country-led organizations. And our members are not policymakers themselves, but many do work closely with governments, with policymakers, and also with teachers and school leaders. And our overarching structure, just quickly to transfer evidence to the field. So what I'll be talking about is this learning activity that we did, which is part of that first objective, to generate evidence and have collective evidence uptake, which we do through catalytic funding initiatives. So the Jacobs Foundation provides funding for members to work on joint projects together, which we're really excited to be sharing in the coming months, some of those findings from those projects. And we have challenge groups that meet, that have thematic, that meet generally every few months and different themes, such as well-being and teacher and school leader voices. And we have our backbone objectives, but okay, I'm gonna keep going because I'm looking at the clock. So for our learning activity, what we did, this is our objective: to gather and synthesize learning on how ELNs or education learning networks can support evidence translation and use to help inform SALEX members, but also other networks, other education networks. These are our 2 learning questions, and we wanted to really focus on identifying some of the successful strategies that networks can use to help identify and collect evidence across the education system. And then how can networks at different levels effectively support evidence use as well? For our approach, we had a desk review, we interviewed facilitators of other education learning networks, and we had focus groups with SALEX members. Okay, so getting into the takeaways, which I would like to spend more time here. So our first takeaway from the report is that education learning networks can support effective evidence use by members and beyond members, including governments, by engaging throughout the entire evidence lifecycle and by using a combination of complementary activities. And so through this learning activity, we identified these 6 buckets of strategies or activities. We have capacity strengthening, participatory evidence generation, curating and synthesizing evidence, advocacy and dissemination, peer learning, and then finally fostering relationships. And we found that these, all of these fall at different levels across the evidence lifecycle. So we tried to map them through evidence generation to translation to use. And we were hoping to kind of start to discover which strategy is most effective, but it's very difficult to find, and a lot of more research is needed in this area. But we found that by using, overlapping strategies or using multiple strategies throughout the evidence lifecycle, our members are able to effectively have better evidence uptake. And so I have a few examples that I'd like to share. So one is from Learn Nigeria, which is a network of mission-aligned organizations dedicated to introducing Nigeria's citizen-led assessment in the country. And they're also part of the PAL network, which is a SALEX member. They worked with federal Ministry of Education, state ministries, and other stakeholders throughout their first project of citizen-led assessment. And our informant described that they brought policymakers to the community, which really created a strong sense of ownership. And for those policymakers, seeing the challenges that community members and teachers obviously are facing firsthand, including lack of school enrollment, was really eye-opening. As a result of this particular study, and you can read this full case study in the report, the government began to adopt a more systematic approach to eliciting data from communities and started using the research results to guide resource allocation as well. And our informant also noted that communities began to implement their own reading clubs organically, which was not part of the network. And so I'm rushing to get through this, but just by using, connecting with different members, so the policymakers, the researchers, and the school leaders throughout this life cycle is really key. Okay, our next takeaway is about the constraints. And so we have the internal constraints in the network, time and resources, which came up again and again. And then these external constraints of politics and power inequities, which can make it very difficult to have evidence use and evidence uptake. And so something that we developed is very simple, but this kind of checklist that our members can use, or other networks as well, to identify some of those drivers and constraints and to begin to brainstorm what are the supporting actors and actions, and how you can start to mitigate some of those. And so this is one tool that we have in the report. Okay, a few minutes. So one example as well was from UNICEF's Data Must Speak, who is another SALEX member. And they strategically identify policy windows to see where there are opportunities for evidence uptake. And so, for example, they talked about if the MOE or the Ministry of Education is developing a new education sector plan, or having a new education grant, that is an opportunity where they can come in and they work very closely with the Ministry of Education to try to mitigate some of these inequities. Okay, keep going. And finally, education learning networks should strive to be demand-driven, inclusive, and collaborative to mitigate these constraints. And so this is quite obvious, but we know that having an effective network really helps their members have better evidence use. And so gaining skills in these activities, or improving in, for example, capacity strengthening or participatory evidence generation, will help your members have better evidence uptake. And so something else that we developed is this menu of activities that we hope to have as like a live document where it will continue to add resources. So if you want to learn about capacity strengthening, you can go and click on any of these toolkits and learn like how to scale with governments, or how to have a better social change networks. I think InHive has a really great resource as well. And so, yes, we hope this is one resource as well that members can use. And SALEX is a great example, in this case, of a network we strive to be demand-driven, listen to our members, and develop this shared vision statement. And yes, one example that I wanted to talk about is catalytic funding. And so our members, through this funding process, have been able to work together and come up with these shared solutions and have better evidence uptake. But I'm running out of time. But in the report, I hope that you're able to go and read some of these examples from our members. Okay. And finally, something else that we developed is this theory of change for how education learning networks can better contribute to evidence use. And so you can walk through and kind of look at the activities, the outcomes, and then the greater impact to better understand how our networks. Oh, sorry, I'm quite nervous. I'm rushing, but yes, this is another resource that you can use if you're an education learning network. And yeah, we hope that it's helpful for other collaborative learning networks more generally. And so thank you. I'm sorry I rushed a lot, but yeah, please check out the report.
Thank you so much, Rebekka. That was very interesting, the network approach, in the sense that you can reach multiple actors in the system, no? And change in the system happens at different layers. So that's a very interesting case study. Thank you. And now we will have Ursula, who will discuss the impact at scale labs.
Great. Thank you, everyone. as Juan said, my name is Ursula. I work with the Global Schools Forum. And I'm going to be honest, I've gone a little bit off-piste from the title of this presentation after we had our group discussion, and case studies from other parts of our program work were slightly more relevant. So hopefully it's still interesting to this discussion. So firstly, who are Global Schools Forum? We're a collaborative community of non-state organizations working to improve education in low and middle income countries. And currently our network spans over 128 organizations working in over 60 different countries. And a lot of our work is drawing on the experience of our members. So a lot of what I'm telling you is gathered from our members rather than kind of the direct experience. Global Schools Forum doesn't do direct delivery. And we have 3 strategic priorities that we are focusing on currently in our 3-year cycle. Firstly, we are working to strengthen and grow a global learning community, so our network of 128 organizations. Our second area is to test promising solutions and to diffuse evidence. And our Impact at Scale Labs is a kind of one of our main programs on this. And thirdly, we're looking to partner strategically to shape policy and scale solutions. And I think this discussion is really interesting because we find that generating evidence and engaging with government education systems and actors cuts across all 3 of these priorities, even as non-state education actors. So today I'm just going to share a few short learnings from our work across a portfolio of projects on generation and uptake across these 3 strategic priorities. I'll also flag that these learnings, alongside case studies and practical tools, have been packaged in a toolkit on our website called the Government and Non-State Partnerships Toolkit, which was launched earlier this year. So a lot of what you're seeing here is in much more detail in that toolkit. So I just wanted to share 3 very high-level learnings that we have from these case studies that we've been working with. So firstly, a big learning from a number of organizations across our community who are working on evidence uptake with governments is invest in coordinating with government bodies from the start of your program or from the start of your evidence journey. It kind of makes sense when you think about it, but actually a lot of us want to have our shiny results and then go and present it to someone's desk and say, look, what a great work we've done. But a number of case studies show that actually organizations have had much better success when that coordination has happened early on and they've worked together hand in hand with government stakeholders. One example of this is from a program called the Building Education Foundation Through Innovation and Technology, which is a program in Malawi. And it's a self-paced learning literacy and numeracy content program. So digital-based tablets in classrooms, which children can follow at their own pace. And the government in Malawi actually launched this in all 6,000 primary schools last year. And talking about actually what was the success in getting government's buy-in to roll it out across the country, when speaking with Imagine Worldwide, they highlighted it was aligning all of the stakeholders at the start of the program, including the Ministry of Education, even though at that point, the only thing they were asking from the ministry was buy-in and support. They weren't asking for anything additional. But then a big part of the strategy became getting government representatives to be responsible for sharing evidence from the program, which aided the uptake and buy-in to the evidence generated itself. So I just thought that was a really great, really practical tip of how to engage governments. Secondly, and I think a number of other people have said this already, but mapping your stakeholders from the start of your program at national, local, and school level, and being really clear of like what is their role in evidence generation and evidence uptake. We all know that for an education innovation to be truly impactful, that all the actors across all levels of the system need to be on board. But often when we talk about government engagement, we can just think about maybe national government or, for example, kind of top decision makers. But in the case studies that we've engaged in, we found that evidence really needs to be packaged and to be relevant to the different types of stakeholders you have, even within that broad bucket of government, and thinking about what are their different roles in terms of utilizing that evidence. So one example that we have here is from United World Schools in Cambodia. They were working on a project to transition ownership from being fully run by themselves and not-for-profit into being run by the government. And in their case study, they were really open that at the start of their program cycle, when they started this transition, there were a number of challenges, and it didn't go as smoothly as it thought. They had this nice 5-year plan of how transition would happen, and they hit a number of bumps along the road. And they realized that actually only certain parts of that government ecosystem were really on board with the evidence and how it had been presented. And so, for example, there were MOUs at the top with national government, but actually at the district level and even sub-district level, it was not really clear what was the role of those different stakeholders in taking up that evidence. What did transition to government ownership look like at the district level, at the community level? So one way that they have now redesigned this phase of their program is to actually start the transition much earlier on and have the conversation about transition be there from the start of the program. So I think this is really interesting that when we're thinking about government and government engagement, it's not just this one big block government, but we really think about using our stakeholder mapping to think about breaking down who are the different government actors and what are their evidence needs, what are their how are they going to be using that evidence, and how are they contributing it as well to build that buy-in? So that kind of leads us on to the third point, which is about prioritizing evidence generation that meets the decision-making needs of those stakeholders. So I think someone else said it before about prioritization, which was really great. And we know that for the greatest chance of impact, we also need to really align with the priorities of decision makers and decisions that we know they are going to make and be able to make. And that aligns to the stakeholder mapping exercise that we can do as well. And one of our partners who's in the room, we have Dignitas Kenya with us here. Something that they did that was really important was in rolling out an app-based instructional leader coaching program. Dignitas were testing using district-level education officials to conduct remote coaching phone calls with instructional leaders based in schools. An important part of this is that it was part of their job. So this is something that we're supposed to be doing. And therefore, adding the coaching phone call was supposed to facilitate a role that they already had. But in the rollout of this and the testing that they've done, and they're going to talk about it in a lot more detail on Thursday, if you are still here then, they actually found that the way that the data was presented was not necessarily facilitating that piece of work for the district education official. So an innovation that they have now been working on is to design a data dashboard specifically for that education official, which clearly aligns to the work that they are supposed to do as their government job, but also there's additional layer of coaching, which is aided through the Lead Now program that Dignitas run. And the data there is presented in a way that is actionable for that individual education official. And it can really show them how they can utilize data in a way that is very personal to them and to the teachers that they are supposed to be supporting. And so this is a way that we can think about actually what are the priorities of government or the education system at different levels, and how can we support them with the data and evidence that actually really speaks to the work that they are doing and the decisions that they need to make. So like I said, these are just 3 very high-level learnings, 3 very brief case studies that I wanted to share with you today. These 3 are in a lot more detail online on our website and our toolkits. And so I'd encourage you to read into them in more detail if you're interested, or to reach out to us, and we're very happy to always speak more about them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ursula. That was very insightful. Consistent findings to the network approach, having different stakeholders mapped in the beginning, but also adding this early engagement, co-design and co-implementation, but also prioritization to make those engagements relevant and grow or to develop ownership. Thank you so much, Ursula. So now I will give the floor to Adia, who she will be describing the Embedded Evidence Lab engagement with the Ministry of Education of Rwanda.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Adia Umusila, and well, I somehow managed to convince IPA to make me the research and policy advisor in the Rwanda country office. And I'm even double nervous because my senior director is Juan. So I hope I do you justice, Juan. Okay. So before I get into this slide, I would like to give a quick background of IPA and what are our 3 pillars for using evidence. So IPA, the 3 pillars is to generate evidence, share evidence, and equip partners to use the evidence. And we have different strategies and mechanisms for doing this, but the one that I work on is the Embedded Evidence Lab program. So the Embedded Evidence Lab program assists governments to institutionalize the use of data and evidence in their policy processes. So what IPA does is basically collaborates with government agencies to establish the labs within their organizations, enabling them to use data and evidence to improve decision-making. So IPA currently supports 24 labs across 16 countries and 7 sectors, including environment, gender, crime, education, social protection, and others. So what is an embedded evidence lab? So these are teams within government agencies dedicated to making the policy-making process more impactful through data and evidence. So we achieve this by identifying the necessary data and evidence challenges, developing and implementing strategies to generate relevant evidence, and facilitating the application of this evidence. So what do we do exactly? So the embedded evidence labs follow a 3-stage cycle, which is what you're seeing now. The first stage is policy challenges mapping, so which kind of goes to what Ursula was talking about, prioritizing decision makers' needs. So the first stage, policy challenge, sorry, did I do that? Swati, do I get more seconds? Okay, so the first stage is policy challenges mapping. So here we basically assist in identifying the main issues within the sector and translating them into learning and research questions. So for particular, the Rwanda program, we help to formulate research and learning agendas together with the government after identifying these policy challenges. Second stage is to basically data and evidence generation, which is basically launching the research and learning agendas tailored to the nature of the questions. And we do this through using various services, for example, descriptive analysis, predictive analysis, impact evaluations, and others. The third stage is applying data and evidence to the policy. So what we do here is we basically connect results with the right people at the right time, and we also assist decision makers in using this evidence to improve policy. And hopefully we hope that this leads to improvement of outcomes at national scale. Okay. So government leadership is a key part of this embedded labs process. So what we do is we embed technical assistance within the government, and then we hope that this will lead to institutionalization. So we have a four sort of leadership considerations. So the first is the process. Here, the lab team designs a learning cycle that connects policy challenges with data and evidence, as well as decision-making. So for the structure and governance, here we have the team determining the location and setup of the team responsible for executing the learning cycle. We also sort of engage with other supporting technical and political actors that's under the structure and governance. In terms of capacity, the team designs and implements a strategy to strengthen system capacity. System capacity includes enhancing the skills and knowledge of individuals within the government agencies, but also it includes strengthening management information systems. This is very important, and we'll get to that in a bit. In terms of resources, we also kind of design and implement strategies for allocating financial resources to sustain the lab activities and also the personnel. We also examine legal frameworks that will allow us to integrate the lab into the organizational structure and deploy strategies to secure political and ecosystem support. Additionally, labs also address organizational culture by promoting the value of using data and evidence and generating demand for these practices. So this is, sorry, you're going to see a lot of this learning cycle, and it's Juan's fault. So this is now the specific learning cycle that the Rwanda Embedded Evidence Lab uses. So the first stage is, how do we identify these policy challenges? So we review existing policy documentations in the Ministry of Education. We also do consultations and stakeholder engagements. We just knock on the door of the minister and ask him, what's on your mind? What is a pressing policy question? And we jot that down into the research and learning agenda. The research and learning agendas are also very flexible, and they're reiterative together with government officials. One thing we've also done, given the umbrella of the IPA existing research, is we get sort of insights from past studies, and then we have new research questions, which we build together with government partners. So that's identifying the policy challenges. Second step is policy-driven and data evidence creation. So we do systems diagnostics, capacity assessments, descriptive analysis, predictive, A/B testing, we're everywhere. Scale up, we also help with scaling up of proven interventions, as you'll see in a bit. The third step is now applying this evidence to policy. This basically, it entails implementing system solutions, communicating results, also translating results, and technical assistance to scale up. And as usual, we hope that this will improve learning outcomes, improve data systems that are able to capture teaching and learning data effectively. So I think those are extra 30 seconds for me, please. Okay, so specifically for the Rwanda Education Lab, this is our structure. So we are embedded in the Ministry of Education, which is up there. Then we're also embedded in two of its implementing agencies. So that's the Rwanda Basic Education Board and the National Examination and School Inspection Authority. This is quite a challenge, given that these are three different institutions. They have separate mandates, and a lot of two of the director generals of the implementing agencies report directly to the Minister of Education. So it's kind of political, and you have to be extra sensitive about implementing the stages of the learning cycle. But the opportunities is that we have access to several areas of work. recently I had to cut down on the research and learning agenda from the different director generals because each of them had about 6 research questions, and we have constrained resources. So that's a good problem to have, and access to several management information systems that churn out a lot of data on teaching and learning in Rwanda. So we have 5 full-time staff embedded in the Rwanda Education Board, in NESA, and the Ministry of Education. So myself, I'm embedded in the Ministry of Education. I have 4 other colleagues embedded across the implementing agencies. So these are our current work streams across the 3 institutions. The first one is the comprehensive assessment. So this is a management information system that captures learning data for over 4 million students in the country. So we're enabling the ministry and the NESA. NESA is in charge of CAMIS to take timely measures to improve learning outcomes by consistently helping with data analysis and evidence generation, and also applying this evidence. Next is centralized teacher recruitment. This is also a management information system, but specifically for teachers. We're sort of standardizing teacher management practices, supporting distribution of teaching resources more efficiently. Swati, you didn't add my 30. STARS. So STARS is an actual scale up of a past RCT that we conducted in, I think, 2016. And the government wanted us to scale it up, but we've kind of continued adapting and reiterating to see what it looks like in large scale implementation. The last work stream is lab institutionalization, research co-creation, and capacity strengthening. So I'll just give 2 case studies of some of the work that we've done that have entailed a complete learning cycle. The first one is the retrospective analysis of the 2020 to 21 national recruitment cycle. So the opportunity came after the first RCT, the Pay for Performance RCT, kind of gave us insight into teacher turnover. So we decided to also conduct a teacher turnover analysis in 2019. We found that, for example, there was 20% teacher turnover rate in Rwanda across the country. But we also found that following the loss of a teacher, districts were only able to provide schools with a replacement 77% of the time. This prompted even a further study into the 2020 teacher recruitment cycle. So what we did was we conducted descriptive and correlational analysis of 2020 recruitment cycle. We applied the evidence to policies through high-level stakeholder engagement and dissemination of results. And we did technical assistance to implementing study recommendations through revising the National Teacher Recruitment Framework and streamlining data collection across districts. We also helped in reconstruction of teacher unique IDs with using the National Identification System. We also developed a live database of teacher statuses, transfers, and vacancies. The impact is we had improved teacher application and retention rates. The management information system is now fully operational. We also managed to link the management information system for teachers with the government payroll system, which is the Ministry of Finance, as well as the Ministry of Public Service system. So now we have also national, district, and school level use following targeted trainings of these users. So is that up? Okay, so these are the key takeaways quickly. How do we effectively institutionalize the embedded evidence labs? One, we need to enhance the use of data and evidence for decision-making through addressing the systems. For example, the teacher management information systems allow us to implement solutions and provide insights for decision-making. We also improve and we support improvements and solutions, but this requires institutionalizations to be scaled and sustainable. For example, through revising the National Teacher Recruitment Framework, we did provide technical assistance. We're also very flexible, as some of my colleagues were talking about. Adaptability and flexibility is key, especially when working with governments. We should be able to respond to diverse agency needs. We're working across 3 agencies. There's a lot of requests coming in for technical support. Okay, and also finally, embedding staff allows access to institutional knowledge, networks, and resources. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Adia. Just to say that your position is well deserved, which is shown by all your achievements. And thank you so much for that presentation. Adia brings us a different perspective, which is consistent to some extent to what we saw so far. There's this idea of co-design, for example, but now we're taking more an institutional approach. We need to change the government processes that have been going into processes, into structures, into capacity and resources. So now we have Doreen, who will bring a similar case in terms of another lab, but in a different context and with a slightly different approach. Thank you, Doreen.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you're not too tired to listen to me. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about WhatWorks Hub with the Thai Educational Laboratory. For some reasons, WhatWorks Hub thought it is very important to create an educational lab so as to make the research effective. So here we go. I'll be talking about what the Thai Ed Lab is, the structure, the roles, what are our focus areas, what's on progress, and what's our EI2 plan. All of these make up how we can use evidence, how the government can use the evidence. So basically, when you talk about the lab, it's just an educational research laboratory, which it has a basic function of designing and identifying opportunities that will improve the implementation of the national framework for teachers' continuous professional development, but also the rollout of the revised curriculum. I'm not sure if you're all aware, but Tanzania, in 2023, we revised our curriculum. Now we are fully competence-based curriculum. So, but also the other thing is the lab is there to leverage the Tanzania Institute of Education's pivotal role of curriculum and training materials development, as this is one of our basic roles in Tanzania. So who are involved in the laboratory? So we have the principal investigators outlined there. We have Professor James, Dr. Annette Komba, she's in the house, the Director General of Tanzania Institute of Education. We have Dr. Richard Shukia, Adrian, and Professor Jacob. But also we have our project manager, we have data analysts, and here I am, the Thai Ed Lab fellow, Doreen, and another one, Sedekia. So since the lab is located at Tanzania Institute of Education, we thought it is very important to locate it in a place where we think it will operate effectively. And so it is allocated in the research and consultancy department, whereby all the researches are conducted. So here we have the structure. So basically the structure reflects back to the second presenter when she said, like, if you want to improve the evidence uptake by the government, you need to involve the key stakeholders at first. So with the WhatWorks Hub in Tanzania team, we have the advisory board, whereby the advisory board is chaired by two deputy permanent secretaries from two ministries, from the Ministry of Education and the President's Office, local government authorities, and regional administrations. So it is also chaired, it also includes members from different departments from these ministries, whereby we have also members from Tanzania Institute of Education, we have members from Teachers Service Commission, we have members from other government departments which deals with education. But also we have development partners. This includes the World Bank, FCDO, UNICEF, and UNESCO. So from the structure, now we can see that each and every study that the lab wants to take, that the labs want to do, they have to report it to the advisory board, whereby the advisory board, with all these government people involved and development partners, they will discuss and come out with an output that aligns with the policy. So from the start, the lab is going to implement a study or a research, which basically it entrusts the government. Means that with the evidence generated, the government is ready to receive it and put it into practice. But also we have the Thai management staff. Since it's allocated at Tanzania Institute of Education, and I'm sorry, I didn't say, it's an institute that deals with curriculum, design, and development but also instructional materials such as textbooks, but also doing conducting training, in-service training for the teachers. So basically the lab being there, it is very important since it's there to conduct two research areas, the teachers' continuous professional development and the rollout of the TCPD. But also after the lab has created the practice and research evidence that is to improve TCPD and the curriculum rollout, it will share, we see an arrow going down, it will share the evidence with the MOEST, PURAG, development partners, and other education stakeholders. So what are its roles? First, it's research, as I've been saying throughout, to design, implement, and disseminate research in relation to the TCPD and rollout of the revised curriculum, and then come up with what works. We want to translate the evidence of what works with regard to teachers' continuous professional development so that the government could know what works in those areas. And then we have the question of sustainability. Yeah, to build capacity for the TIE staff. As you can see, as an EdLab fellow, I'm here from TIE, Government Institute. So after the end of the period of the implementation of the program, we hope that all of what we have been doing can still be an ongoing process. What do we focus on currently? First, we are identifying barriers to the educational learning management system. And this we are building up on the existing EduTech Research Hub. The EduTech people are conducting research on how to leverage the LMS for the teachers. And so what we are doing is we're just building on their research. But also we want to increase teachers' engagement with the LMS platform. There's a lot of passive data on teachers who are registered in the LMS. We really use that to know what the teachers are interested in, how are they accessing it, what are the problems and all of that. But also we want to showcase the geographical patterns and access of the LMS. Not every part of Tanzania they're interested maybe in on a certain kind of a module. Maybe others are not. Okay, I want to talk about, there are different problems on teachers based on their geographical location. And we think that with the data that is available on the LMS, we'll be able to identify which incentives should be sent to which area compared to the others. But also we have a set of modules teachers that could use to overcome and their pedagogical problems, which were basically identified through a study. And so we would like to use the learning management system to know how these modules are of interest to them. But also we are using, we're going to leverage the WELS and SQL's monitoring to increase the likelihood that teachers adopt improved teaching practices through the TCPD. The other area of focus is aligning in-person trainings with the LMS content. We want to use surveys and focus group discussions of teachers' continuous professional development coordinators to teach and learn about what are the teachers' demand on the teachers' continuous professional development, what are the teachers' competence concerning with the tablets, but also teachers' awareness on the knowledge and the content of LMS. But also want to identify barriers which are making teachers not to access the LMS. These might be high cost of internet or maybe inadequate training and somehow tablet malfunctions. But also we are focusing on monitoring the rollout of the revised curriculum. This is the very most important part. We are actually going to conduct a phone survey, a usage of phone survey and then personal person survey to measure how teachers' knowledge of the revised curriculum, their perception, their fidelity of implementation. But also we are going to draw samples of listening posts from schools to track the implementation of the revised curriculum. So what's on progress right now? We are conducting a phone survey. This is to identify the unmet delivery of the revised curriculum. But we're also going to see how LMS engagement. On this, we have divided the regions into 4 zones. We have considered the number of schools that are in remote areas, but also non-remote areas. So we have a total of 400 schools in the phone survey, whereby we will talk to 4 teachers from each school, making it a total of 1,600 respondents. But also we are going to conduct an SMS campaign, and this campaign is basically to increase teachers' engagement in the LMS system. We are going to identify barriers to platform utilization, facilitating logins and new content, engaging head teachers to promote utilization. What are we going to do on the next year, since we have only 2? So we are going to prepare another monitoring, since the curriculum rollout it comes in phases. So when the monitoring that we are doing right now on the phone survey, we are doing it for the first phase. And so next year we are going to do for the second phase. But also we are enhancing the effectiveness of the communities of learning. And also we are helping TIE in tracking the textbooks distribution. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Doreen. That was very interesting. Again, some consistent findings, the need to map stakeholders and involve them. I think the model that Doreen has presented brings an emphasis on how to involve researchers and other actors in the ecosystem in a institutionality like an embedded lab. So again, thank you so much to our panelists. They have brought so many insights and experiences, and now I would like to invite them to sit in the chairs on the front together with our commentator, Donika. We would like to do this a little bit more of a conversation, so Donika will be discussing some of her insights based on the presentation. Yes, please, if you could join us. And then after Donika's remark, we will open it to you to ask all those thoughts and interesting questions you are thinking of.
We're gonna get started. Okay, well, hi everyone. So I have the privilege of being a discussant, which I think means just listen to what brilliant ideas everyone else has and try to kind of steal them and summarize them. And I'm my colleague Samwel was supposed to be here. Unfortunately, he couldn't attend, so I'll be a poor substitute to Samwel, who's very, very knowledgeable on all of these topics. I think he's online. Hi, Samwel. I don't know if you can see me somewhere. So I'll just start by saying that, first of all, thank you to everyone who shared this work. We at the Jacobs Foundation, I mean, we've made it our mission, our 10-year mission, 2020 to 2030, to put evidence at the heart of policy and practice. And we're trying to do that both in kind of high resource settings in our home country, Switzerland, but also in middle and lower income settings. So this is very close to our heart. And when Juan asked me to reflect on some of the lessons learned, I mean, we're almost 5 years into our strategy. And I can share with you a little bit of kind of high-level reflections, also building on what we heard today from the presenters and some of the insights and takeaways from that work. So first off, let me just say, I mean, some of the things that you heard about today, we've had the privilege of supporting them financially. And at the heart of what we've been trying to do is to test different ways of getting evidence into policy and practice at 2 levels, at a global level and at a country level. So building learning networks, supporting ed labs. We're not funding some of the ones that you heard about here, but we are funding others in Cote d'Ivoire and in Ghana. In Switzerland, which interestingly has been one of the toughest places for us to actually build some of these mechanisms, and in Colombia, which is a newer addition to our work. So I wanted to share a little bit of some of the highlights of that. And also, maybe this is the time of day when you need to be a little provocative and say a few things and just see what happens. So one first thing I wanted to say is that we've recently had an opportunity to look at the whole portfolio of work that we've been funding. And some of the things that we found are things that we expected, and some of the other things were things that we did not expect to find to the degree of what they were in terms of severity of the challenges. And one of those, so I'll share three. The first one is the global to local disconnect. And you heard from many of the presenters today and on this panel, the fact that what we're producing globally, and we are a foundation that funds research in terms of fellowships and kind of academic production is our bread and butter. The disconnect between what is needed, and I don't just mean demand, but even when demand is not fully articulated, the things that are needed in terms of evidence are massive. But what is being produced globally doesn't actually take account of what exactly is needed. For the most part, in terms of the research agendas that are being developed and how we're even structuring the production of research. Generally, I'm generalizing here. And that disconnect, we think, also has an issue of missing the connecting tissue between the local and the global. What are those connecting pieces that have to be put in place in order for the local to inform the global and for the global to develop research that actually is meaningful, useful, relevant at the country level. So that connective tissue doesn't seem to be there. So that's one. The second one is something that I find really fascinating, which is the kind of journey of evidence. Many of you mentioned that, of what is the actual journey of evidence. And I think that what we're seeing right now is that there is a kind of a big patchwork of evidence efforts and initiatives at a global level and a country level, but those things are not connected very well. So we're all funding different things, we're all working on different projects, but it doesn't seem that we're actually adding them up to a bigger whole. That doesn't mean that they're not valuable and impactful, but the potential impact of that aggregate value of connecting them up has not been realized yet. So that's something that we're actively looking at, which also comes back to the previous point of what's the global evidence architecture, and how does that architecture create the piping around the system? That piping is not quite there yet. So what I heard today, actually, to be frank, was we're still working on a project basis. We're not tapping into a common piping. And then thirdly, we're also looking at the science of science, or research on research. And a lot of the modalities that we're testing here, what it was really exciting to see is that we're actually pulling out some common core ingredients across the different initiatives that we heard about from this panel of what's actually working on translation. We talk about translation, but it still is very project-based, of this worked or this didn't work, but at the aggregate level, it doesn't feel like we're still investing enough in the knowledge on knowledge or science on science. And other fields have done arguably a slightly better job than we do in education of doing that. So that's something that we're looking at as well, of how do we not only build the ed labs as individual efforts at a country level, but actually, and I'll call out on Clara, who's sitting back there from OTT, who helped us develop a report looking at what are the ed lab models out there, from even going back to the Education Endowment Foundations, you know, the one here in England that's arguably one of the best known ed lab like models in the world. What have we learned from all of these experiments? And the good news is there are many out there. Bad news is that we haven't learned a lot from what works and what doesn't work. So how do we build the science on these kinds of things? So the meta kind of question that we all have, which is beyond individual projects, beyond even individual settings, how do we create the science on knowledge brokering, translation, and that sort of thing? So that's what we're also looking at. So these are different, maybe not very encouraging news. I'm sorry about that. But I think that the fact that we're out together and that we are looking at all of these different dimensions, and I know we spend the next 3 days doing that as well, is encouraging that we are in fact starting to pull up from individual projects to these bigger, more fundamental, foundational issues that are important. So I'll stop there. Oh, I can hold on.
Or maybe, I think now we open it to the audience. Yeah. Thank you.
You. Hi. Well, thanks for the expositions today. My name is Marcela Colombres. I come from Chile, from Fundación Chile. And we are also partners there from LUC6 Foundation in a big coalition of 25 entities, also trying to figure out how to use evidence in educational decisions. I have a question, I think, for Ursula. You talk about how you're focused in evidence generation, but which methodology or how do you track if that evidence is being effectively used? Like the long-term question, maybe we are making efforts in defining a common language of what evidence is, a scientific approach for evidence, to transform data to evidence. But how do you track in your network the usability, the effectiveness of this disposition?
Hi, great presentation and great insights. My name is Abir. I'm doing a DPhil at Oxford, but I also run a policy platform in Bangladesh called Youth Policy Forum. So one of the work that we do is we do youth-led policy papers. For example, if BSG does a 100-page report, we summarize it in 2 pages and give it to politicians. So what has been interesting, because it's done by young people, is quite fast. And I've seen that the policymakers don't read the large documents, but if you give them like 1 or 2 pages, something digestible, then they are more likely to read that. But even that number is very low. As in, like, if you target 100 politicians, probably 10% of them would be willing to have that discussion. So given your extensive experience, I would be keen to know of instances where you approach with evidence and certain policymakers took it up, others ignored, or you're working with multiple agencies. In one agency you had success, in others you had failure. So contrasting examples like that would be useful.
Yeah.
Thanks. That is a really great question. And I definitely don't think that we have a definitive answer or even a definitive approach that we are using at Global Schools Forum. Some initial thoughts that I had just based on your question. Most of the work that we are doing is focusing more on how non-state organizations can generate and then use their data and their evidence internally to strengthen and improve their own programs, their own implementation. But the stakeholder mapping piece and the roles and responsibilities that I talked about, we really encourage the organizations that we are working closely with to use that tool and to pinpoint which stakeholders, obviously government stakeholders are some, but other implementing organizations, other parts of the education ecosystem can obviously be very important as well. And when do they bring them in around which types of decision making? So that the way that we're kind of encouraging organizations to use evidence is to really look at testing and then adapting that approach to implementation. And obviously bringing in different parts of the education ecosystem into that process is sort of more or less relevant depending on what you're testing or at what stage your program is. So our approach has been really to work with organizations to identify approaches, culture, of kind of learning, openness, how we use evidence to make decisions rather than presenting a nice shiny report of results at the end, and then encouraging organizations to think about how they can use that within their own ecosystem. So we definitely do not have a blueprint of how we do this or how we would encourage organizations to do this at scale. I think it is a really big question though. So yeah, very interesting. Be interested if anyone else on the panel has any reflections on that.
Yeah, maybe I can share a bit from the SAILX perspective. And I think the short answer is that it's very, very difficult to track. We asked in our interviews a lot of it to our informants, like how have you seen this? How have you seen the evidence being uptaked? And most of the time, like, it takes years and years, right, for a network to make this happen. But yeah, I think there's no right answer, but we're hoping that some of the tools we developed, so our theory of change, if you look in the report, it's one way to kind of map out and do some of that mapping, that stakeholder mapping as well. But yeah, I think that just to say that there is really no answer, but through networks, we found that having these interactions, these face-to-face interactions, meeting in person regularly and having these touch points, that's when we really see the change, right? So for our members, when they're getting to meet at these types of conferences, we're bringing people together. We were recently at the East African Educational Conference in Arusha, where I was with one of my colleagues here. And just having our members get to interact with one another, that's where they're starting to build those relationships and then seeing the evidence slowly being uptaked. But it's a very, very long process. And I think there's no blueprint, as Ursula said, but that's something that really there needs to be more research on how networks are effectively doing this.
Thank you. Maybe the education labs examples could speak to this, which is a different approach in the sense that this research capacity, this production capacity is inserted within the government. So it would be curious to understand from your perspective how the dissemination, translation, and facilitation of use happens using this type of approach.
Okay. For our part as the government, now I'm the policymaker, responding to my question. It's usually for Tanzania Institute of Education, we usually welcome most of the times the development partners when they come with something that has proven to be really working out, and we usually give them a chance to let's do it together so that we can also prove that it really works before disseminating it to a larger scale. This is to avoid taking many things at a time to the teachers and the educational system in general. So that is how we usually prove how the evidence is really uptake. Yeah.
Thank you. So obviously for the evidence lab, it's quite different, but it's really important to engage the decision makers and the stakeholders from the initial stages. So that was the first step of the learning cycle. You discuss with them, you find out what's keeping them up at night, especially the decision makers. You formulate a research and learning agenda. But then even during the next steps of the learning cycle, you have to always engage stakeholders. So for example, if the minister has given a specific research question, then in terms of generating the evidence to answer this question, you have to work with the technical level people because they usually have these nuanced details of the challenges and they actually help, they kind of guide what you're looking for with the data. So by the time you get now to the decision maker in terms of the third steps, which is applying the evidence to policy, they already, for me, in my experience, for example, at the start of the dissemination, they have questions and I tell them it's coming. I answered those questions. And the only reason I answered those questions is because I spoke maybe to a technical level person and they said, you should also look into this and into that. So by the time you're disseminating the results and trying to help with applying evidence to policy, you've kind of covered all the corners, most of the corners anyway. And this really helps with uptake because then it's kind of co-owned or co-owned, with the government officials. Then by the time it gets to the Minister of Education or whoever is the decision maker, then everything is kind of solid and there's uptake. Thank you.
Thanks. I had a question for Donika. I really thought the framing was very helpful, the way you had framed it. And I think the whole afternoon he heard speakers from Dir who spoke about coalition building. Chavi spoke about harmonizing education programs in the system. And in the second panel, we also spoke about how different actors in that USAID 5-year program came together to make it happen. So considering this room is full of people who are basically working from different geographies, maybe similar, but also in same geographies and similar themes, I was just wondering what it would take. I'm not necessarily asking you to answer this question, but it could be anybody in the panel as well. But just curious to see how, given that What Works Hub for Global Education is, I guess, also to translate this, what would it look like for that pipeline, for that whole picture to sort of be a little more system lens rather than programmatic, be it research or even action? Was that helpful?
I'm going to attempt an answer, or do you want to take more questions?
I think we can take one and then.
Yeah, Robert Palmer, Queen Money Foundation, Jordan. One comment and one question. Donika, your point about there being a global patchwork. So I think patchwork is too nice a word because that implies they're kind of knitted together, and I see it as more like a global fragmentation of efforts. I mean, just jotting down a few, we've got the new What Works Hub, we've got ERIC, also FTDO funded, we've got NORAG, we've got the EEF Evidence and Education Network, we've got Brookings KDN Network, we've got education.org, we've got SALEX, we've got IPA, we've got Global Schools Forum. For the donors, we've got IEFG, which is all about learning. We've got the BE squared as well. So there's a lot going on, not enough talking together. That's the comment. The question is, at the local level, there's also, if you like, a patchwork of fragmentation, right? And in Jordan, and I'm sure it's not unique, in Jordan, there's an avalanche of information all the time on the ministry. They have no way of filtering the avalanche. So the question is, these EdLab models, are they in some way helping to filter the avalanche, or are they part of the problem?
Yeah.
Emily Gray, FCDO. It'd be really useful to know, with the evidence uptake that you're working on, how much does the conversation about affordability, value for money, and costing come in? Because obviously, especially in lower income context, that is often such a critical element of the discussion, but I feel it often gets lost in the conversations that are often had.
Like to start. And then that's what's right. Yeah.
Let's start with the last one.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of cost and cost effectiveness, actually what we have seen in our programs, especially in the Impact at Scale labs, and especially from more recent funders, is that there has been quite a drive towards more consistent and more comparable reporting on, say, cost per child or cost per outcome. And I think my only reflection on that is that it's obviously, well, the cost per child is obviously something that is like relatively easy to measure and relatively easy to compare across interventions. What is obviously much more difficult is the kind of cost per outcome. We've talked a lot about how difficult it is to really attribute outcomes effectively. So I think there's some level of caution around like how comparable that is across different programs. And I also, in reflection to the cost, which is obviously very important when considering scaling, but how do we also make sure we bring in a kind of equity lens or consideration around marginalization to make sure that cost doesn't become the main driver at the expense of excluding some groups of children, families, young people who potentially might be more expensive to reach those same outcomes or to reach at all. But yeah, we have seen costs become a increasingly important consideration across all our programs.
Okay, I'll just give a quick answer also to the cost of evidence uptake. So for example, the Rwanda lab specifically, one of the scale-up that we're working on is the STARS adaptive trial for incorporating learning outcomes in teachers' performance contracts. But the key thing about this trial is that we're doing everything in government context, in existing government context. So in terms of what we're doing with teachers already have performance contracts. We're just changing the content of the performance contracts to include their pupils' learning outcomes. So, and this has been something that has really helped with advocacy with the government, because we show them that you don't have to add anything on your budget line. It's just we're tweaking things in an innovative way, and we're also adapting each year, changing, looking at what's working and what's not working. So that's really key, looking at how you can make sure evidence uptake is considered in existing government systems rather than having to ask them to add additional budget lines.
Oh, sorry, Doreen.
For us, I think it's a matter of taking it into consideration as we are going through, because we don't have any results yet, as we are starting with the phone survey, which basically we are using an organization that we hired to do the phone survey. So I think as we are going on, I think we should, maybe next year, if I have a chance to come again, I'll be able to tell you like how are the results and how are we considering on the cost and everything. Thank you.
Thank you. I think on the embedded labs, one interesting approach is that there's an initial investment from funders, which brings the team that is going to provide technical assistance to enable that or to generate that lab. But then the vision is that the government has to start taking leadership on that lab. And that means that the government has to change their budget allocations to start investing on the lab. Which is investing actually in enable the system to be able to use and generate data and evidence. So when you see the returns of investment to an education lab, it increases across time. There's an initial investment that donors have to do, but then there's this contribution coming from the government that at the beginning is in kind, so they allocate a staff, but the staff has a cost as well, or they maybe implement workshops. But then later on, they just enable the full team. They institutionalize the team, the processes, and that has an annual line in the budget. So it's a constant investment in a structure to promote the use of data and evidence. And when it comes to the avalanche of information, the opportunity with labs is that they start with a research and learning agenda that is driven by the government, or government plus ecosystem, depending on the scheme. And that means that there's an opportunity for a clear link between the research and the decision that is going to inform. Nevertheless, there's a tension between being strategic, having a research and learning agenda, and being relevant to the system, which is like you have these demands coming from the minister every day, and you need to react to them. And labs are struggling in that, and they are trying to find their balance. No? And probably our labs colleague can speak to that.
I think going back to your original question, I mean, two thoughts. One is, I think our field has fallen into the trap of no one wants to build the piping, right? Because it's not sexy, it's not fun, it's boring. And we're not, I like to be, to point, it is a patchwork. If you want to be nicer, you can say we're not at a level of maturity of where other fields are. I mean, we talk about health and education, they're very different. I was just looking at, Wellcome Trust coming out with 45 million investment in the evidence ecosystem to build all the piping that is required. But look at health and how much more advanced some of that. The utility company for health, let's say that is a much more consolidated set of players, and there's more maturity to that field. Could we have done it earlier? Maybe. I think this is now a window of opportunity. I do see the What Works Hub is a key player in that and an element to that. But I think that there will be, I mean, all the people around the room is what are the institutional incentives to collaborate? Let's look at that. Why? So there are a number of different things that are at play. And I would say, though, being optimistic, that there are, I'm seeing glimmers of hope that we can get to kind of weaving it together and actually beginning to move the field towards a degree of maturity. That would be a positive outcome of the kind of meeting that we're in today over the next few days. Can we come out with a couple of things? To give a very concrete example, we're looking at what does that global piping need to be like? How do we code research? How do we create meta tags for like boring stuff? No one wants to sit and talk about like, how do you even code stuff? Those are the kinds of things that we need to invest in order for the jobs of the people in around the room to get easier. If those things are not there, the ed labs are operating in silos. Where are they docking? Where is the docking system? So these are the things I think can happen. Can we do it? Or none of us here have the money or the know-how to do it alone. So this is going to take a concerted effort to get to.
Thank you, Donika. So we have 4 minutes to end the session. I see there's a person behind that has been raising her hand for almost an hour. And then I think we can take 1 or 2 additional questions. I think you want to ask a question and maybe yours as well. And then we need to wrap up there.
Thank you, Juan. My name is Clara. I'm from OTT. We are working with Jacobs. We did a review on ed labs and what we know about evidence use. It's really interesting. So what I want to ask the ed labs that are in the panel now and everybody who's working in this sector is how much are the ed labs working on instrumental change of evidence? So that's related to the question of, okay, we actually want this research to influence such policy, or how much are the ed labs working to change the system? So what is called embedding evidence in a system. So I'm very aware that for researchers it's much more interesting to work on the instrumental change, but I think it's really important for ed labs to do that self-reflection on what is more important right now, particularly when, as the guy there said, about the amount of information and evidence that already exists. Thank you.
Dan Wagner, University of Pennsylvania. I'm very optimistic based on this panel. I think it's a great panel. I think and I've been around long enough to know that we in the field of education have been wrong many, many times when we tried to build piping before we had evidence. Some of us will remember those days. And I think we have come a long way. I mean, the idea that educational researchers are now inside the ministries of education. I mean, 20 years ago, that was really unusual. Now it's sort of becoming a bit of a norm. I think that we have a lot to build on, and maybe the metaphor is piping, but maybe it's also more, I like the word maturity, because I think we are a more mature group. And I've been at these conferences 20 years ago where the questions were very different and there was no ed labs and no people representing ministries of education talking with us. So just since we're ending our time, I want to feel good when we go to the coffee break.
Kind of linked to the previous around. Oh. Thank you, Bonnie. I'll be quick. Priyanka Devani, Think Equal, and thank you very much for those presentations. Sort of linked to just the previous comment there. I felt that, when we're talking about evidence uptake and use by governments, quick sort of reflection on to what extent can we engage and forge partnerships, not just with individual researchers, but with local universities and research institutions who tend to have quite a bit of spare capacity and very good relationships with ministries of education. So I guess felt that, I don't know to what extent the education labs that we have already and the forums that you have bring on and forge partnerships with a whole host of universities in countries to really support that evidence uptake.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to overrun my role as the chair. I'm going to answer one of the questions. Thank you so much for that question. I think is building or designing and implementing a lab is an iterative process. You need to first try, adjust, and then scale, as any other thing in life. So there's a piece of it which is instrumental, is trying to find, what are the questions in the system, try to discuss how we're going to address those, and then implement. Based on that, start to map what are the changes in the system to enable a routine process of instrumental impact. No? But I think there are other things in your question, which are talking to incentives, for example, which is also referred to your comment, with having researchers engage with their labs brings a different set of incentives from the government incentives, no? A different way of looking at things, which is good, and sometimes not so good, depending on what you are trying to address. Having them inside the government, maybe try to help us align a little bit better those incentives. But definitely that's a tension that labs confront. But I don't know if our labs colleagues would like to speak to that question, or we pass it to the next one. No? Oh, yes, please.
So on how much the ed labs are working towards policy, not too instrumental, with what we are doing at TIE, the ed lab, we are basically building up on the initiative that the government is actually doing. With the Teachers' Continuous Professional Development, it is a government program. So what EdLab is trying to do is to improve it more by creating evidence that the government could use to improve how are teachers going to engage more in the CPDs with the LMS, Learning Management System engagement. How are teachers going to access the LMS? What is the teachers' perception? So I feel like these labs they'll bring a big change, and they put more power to what the government is trying to do right now for us.
Okay, maybe I could also speak quickly on sort of sustainability of the ed labs. Okay, we're in the government or the Ministry of Education, but how do we make sure that the process is institutionalized, the process of using evidence? So we do have a lab institutionalization strategy, which entails changing the process and the structure within the Ministry of Education through that learning cycle. But then we take each step of the learning cycle together with identified personnel or government counterparts who we kind of recruit into the lab. So we learn with them, we do with them, but we also build their capacities to be able to provide these services once IPA transitions out of the lab through capacity building sessions, about 3 a year, but also we also have learning by doing sessions. So the different, for example, descriptive analysis, predictive analysis, we start from the policy mapping together with different government counterparts. We code together, we do stata, do files and everything together. We come up with a data visualization to that together, and then even present to the decision makers together with technical level staff. So then they kind of learn the system and the process, and then once IPA transitions out, it's also, it's already a sort of embedded process. That's just one of the institutionalization strategies. There's a bunch more.
Okay, thank you so much. That was very engaging. Thank you to all of you for your contributions. I really enjoyed this time. I hope you did as well. So with this, we wrap up. Closing remarks. Okay, sorry.
Thank you very much for that. We'd like to welcome Armando back up to the podium for a few closing remarks.
Oh, day has gone very fast. So I was invited to do the final remarks. A very difficult task for me, but I will try anyway. But allow me to start by thanking the COP community for organizing this, Michelle, Kathy, and team. It's such nice to work with you and to make this happen in a very smooth way. So congratulations to the organization. I also want to thank our the steering committee members, the Central Square Foundation, Fundawande, and the PAL network that I'm representing. It's a privilege to have you. I saw you facilitating some sessions with support also from Juan and Donika. So for all of you who facilitated sessions, moderated also, thank you for that. The last one, I was very lucky because when I was invited, they told me, don't think about the presentations. People will take their own notes, just share your sentiments. And that's what I'm sharing now. Don't take this as a conclusion of any debate. It's just my sentiments that probably could be also important to address in our next meeting if we have the chance to have one. When Anastut started, he talked about this invisible character that no one knows, but we all believe when we are a child. He called it Yeti Yeti. We also had a similar one back home. And it seems that this business of scale is our Yeti. We all know we want this, but we have never seen. I hope we'll have Yeti here in our next meeting. So we can see, or maybe different Yetis in different colors. So we touch and we see how they look like. So we have a big picture of what we are looking for. Different options of Yetis. Please, people, bring Yeti next time. We want to have a conversation with her or with he, so we learn from experience what it looks like to have something at scale. And I was also reflecting essential about incentives, because it seems that we do have enough knowledge about what works. We still have enough knowledge about pedagogies that have shown to be effective in improving learning outcomes. We have examples in which civil society, donors, and governments have engaged and have worked together, but it's not enough. The main question that I'm asking myself is, what are the incentives to make this work? Especially incentives from teachers' perspective, from government's perspective. Are our governments not interested in the learning of their people? If they are, why is it not happening? With the whole knowledge that we have. And allow me to share also a little bit about my own story. I grew up in a post-conflict and post-independence Mozambique. I shared a year ago in a podcast with Rise that the first time I sat in a classroom with shares, I was in grade 4. I have never had a classroom with less than 50 students. We were sitting under the tree for our schools. We used books from our siblings. And when I was telling that story, I think your colleague, Rebekka, she said, oh yeah, she's there. She said, my mom said that too. And she's from Tanzania. those were the conditions that we had. But at grade 4, when teacher asked us, who want to read this page? We are almost fighting to read that page because almost 80% of us could read. We are fighting to get the chance to read. The level of conditions, information, and the resources that were available then were much less than what we have today. So why is it that this is going down? Why is it going down? When I look at my own experience, I think what our teachers and our systems had, which is different from what we can see today, was one thing: purpose. There was a feeling that our teachers are really interested in making us learn. And our governments were also putting the best that they could do to ensure that children can learn. There was a purpose in making a new generation of people who could read and do basic maths. I'm pushing this to reading and basic maths. I know that it's more than that, but some of you will be on the same page like me that those are probably the starting points. Is it difficult to get our children to read and do basic maths? Why today? And maybe I will take this back to the purpose issue. Today I had at least two ways. Someone mentioned the mission mode approach from India. I think it was from Central Square Foundation. Is that a way to go? Probably we find the ways of creating incentives through a mission mode approach, or probably thinking about the outcome-based funding. Is that probably the way to go? But what are the different alternatives that we can put in place to test incentives to improve learning outcomes? Maybe if we get some ways of testing that and discussing next time, we may have a different angle of understanding, because we have been investing a lot in pedagogies, in structures, in linkages with government. All of that is happening some way, but I think we could still do more on incentives. What make a teacher be interested in making his or her children good readers and good in manipulating numbers? What is it we will make a local governor or a president to be interested and to invest on that? Probably as a community, we can incentivize that to happen, and we can test if there are new learnings coming from that angle as well. So I have still 5 minutes, and this is all I wanted to share. So I will ask you if you want to add something on this, but if not, I will stop here and send back to Michelle if you want to say something. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Armando, I think, for bringing it right back home, right, to what the focus really is on the children that we want to see learning and have a higher quality education. And that's what brings us all in this room. So with that, I'm just going to say thank you on behalf of the What Works Hub for Global Education for joining us with this today. Couple of my takeaways. One, we now have a community of practice mascot, the Yeti. So next time we'll need like maybe some kind of life-size something that joins us. Two is this is the start of a journey. The What Works Hub is new. We have a 6 to 8 year runway still. So I hope that you'll all be on the journey with us for a long time to come. Lots of great work to do and lots of great connecting and learning from each other. So much more to come. And third is that there are some drinks and snacks out in the forum. We have a little mingle time. So please do connect, talk with all of our speakers, ask them all the questions that you weren't able to get in, and connect with each other. And with that, I'll just say thank you from the Hub.